Okay, amazing. Well, I know we are already a few minutes behind, so maybe we will get started and people will continue to trickle in. But I'm Priyanka Jain. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Evvy, a company focused on discovering and leveraging female biomarkers that we've overlooked in our research, starting with the vaginal microbiome. And I'm so incredibly excited and honored to be here today with the most incredible group of leaders who are also thinking about ways that we can improve access to better information and treatments around women's health. But maybe we can start with just a quick around the table if all of you want to share a little bit about your background and what you do. Patricia, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, my name is Patricia Ladis. I am a registered physical therapist. I'd like to think that I'm a very, have a holistic approach. My background is I used to be a professional dancer, and dancers were finally coming back after pregnancy, not hanging up their point shoes, and had all sorts of like pelvic floor issues and issues around the transition, kind of returning from dance into back on stage after pregnancy. And so that's a little bit of a subspecialty of mine, and working with the pelvic floor and doing things like real-time ultrasound to try to help activate all of these muscles that should be involuntary in a very nice balanced way, and figuring out the root cause of pain. And I work with the professional tennis circuit, and I am on the women's health task force for the first ever women's health task force for the female athlete with the WTA, the Women's Professional Tennis Circuit, and the Hologic. And I'm very excited to start kind of providing guidelines to help propel women's health forward for athletes and the regular population.
I love that. Your work is just so cool. We've had so many Evvy patients actually go on to see you and people in your practice and have just had an incredible experience. So we are very grateful for the work you do.
Thank you.
Melissa, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Kramer. I'm the CEO and founder of Live UTI Free, alongside being a PhD researcher. I'm at the University of Reading in the UK. And we provide a lot of free educational resources for patients. We connect them with clinicians in their region. We also collaborate with other researchers, as well as conducting our own patient research. And we provide recruitment for research. But mainly we're here for patients, so we're always happy to hear from our community, and we constantly like to gather feedback, so feel free to reach out to us.
Yes, Live UTI Free is an absolutely incredible resource that we link to and support all the time. And that actually leads very well into Krystal, who provides a lot of scientific support in writing for Live UTI Free.
Yes, hello, I'm Krystal Thomas-White. I am a PhD in microbiology and immunology. I've been studying the vaginal and urinary microbiomes now for about 10 years, and I am delighted now to be at Evvy as their senior scientist. I help them do research with all of their data, work with academic collaborators, and also communicate with the public. So make sure that all of our online content and in-product content is as scientifically accurate as possible, so that you, the user and the reader, can really trust what you see on our platforms. So I'm excited to talk here today too.
Yes, we feel lucky every single day to have Krystal on our team. So we were going to start as the first topic focused around what is the vaginal microbiome, what are UTIs, and what is the pelvic floor? We have three of the best people in the world to answer those questions. So I will hand it over first to Krystal. Do you want to explain kind of what is the vaginal microbiome for anyone here who has not heard that term before, and why is it important for overall female health?
I would be delighted. So the microbiome, the human microbiome, consists of all of the bacteria that live in and on you. And most research is trying to figure out how those microbes affect your health. So when we look specifically at the bacteria in the vaginal microbiome, we're talking about not just bacteria, but fungi and maybe even viruses that make up the community that live in your vagina. And I know when a lot of people hear about bacteria, they automatically think that it's disease causing and unhealthy, but there's actually really good bacteria that live in you and help you every single day, specifically in your vagina. So we think of it as protective and disruptive. And in general, a good guideline is that most lactobacilli are considered protective. So they produce compounds like lactic acid that decrease pH and things that will kill other bacteria called antimicrobial peptides. And all of these will help prevent pathogens from taking hold. So these really are the good bugs that you want keeping you healthy. But that ecosystem can be disrupted by a variety of different things that allow for pathogens or disruptive bacteria to take hold. And that's when you get vaginitis is the most common disorder. So you have bacterial vaginosis or aerobic vaginitis that cause uncomfortable symptoms like maybe discharge, itchiness, or even pain. And it's that balance of disruptive to protective that's really out of whack. And so unfortunately, that disruptive state is also associated with a lot of other downstream effects like increased susceptibility to STIs, increased susceptibility to UTIs for Melissa, and even more serious things like fertility and pregnancy complications. So there's a lot of reasons why understanding your vaginal microbiome is really important, not just for your current health and any problems you're currently going through, but anything down the road as well.
Amazing. Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Krystal. Melissa, do you want to talk a little bit about what UTIs are, why they happen, and why they're sometimes related to vaginal health?
Sure. So the basic definition of a UTI is an infection that occurs anywhere in the urinary tract, and that includes the ureters, the bladder, the kidneys, and the urethra. And the ureters are the tubes that connect the kidneys to the bladder. And so there's also a theory about chronic UTI, which is what we kind of cover, recurrent and chronic UTI. And the theory is that bacteria or other pathogenic organisms actually become embedded in the bladder wall or attached to the bladder wall, and that makes them very difficult to treat. There's no medical definition or no consensus on the medical definition of what chronic UTI is, so you often hear patients referring to it in this way. It's not necessary that clinicians refer to it in the same way. Patient experiences can have like such a broad spectrum. They can go from just occasional episodes of UTI right through to continuous symptoms. And that's one of the reasons that we really need to better understand this patient population, have more research in this space, because we just don't know why that happens, why it becomes chronic in the first place for some people and not others. And there's so much work to be done. And as Krystal mentioned, there is this potential interaction between the vaginal and urinary microbiome. So we do see this overlap in those two microbiomes, and patients in our community often say they have to treat both, not just one, in order to resolve their symptoms. Though many people are still in the journey to try to resolve their symptoms. It's really not an easy task when you have these kinds of chronic infections.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we experience that with our community so often, and that's why resources like yours are so incredibly helpful. Patricia, do you want to talk a little bit about the pelvic floor, what it is, and how it's related to vaginal health and overall health?
So the pelvic floor is a series of muscles at the bottom of the pelvis, right? The area that we sit on. The front being your pubic bone, the back being your tailbone, and the two sides being your ischial tuberosities, the bones you sit on. And when you have a vaginal microbiome that is not in balance, usually your pelvic floor muscles are also not in balance. These are involuntary muscles. They kind of give you that continence, right? And they kind of, you're not leaking in your pants like you did when you were a baby with diapers. And they also provide almost a cueing through the diaphragm, which is above it. And so there's this kind of symbiotic relationship of these wonderful automatic processes that keep your pelvic floor doing what it's supposed to do. When the microbes are in this out of balance state, it also affects the kind of reactivity in these muscles. The tissues start to get, oftentimes they're irritated. That also changes muscle tone. It can get tight in one place, maybe because you're uncomfortable, you're finding yourself in all sorts of weird postures. All of these kind of musculoskeletal issues start to happen potentially in response to what's happening internally. So that's why I love Evvy, because oftentimes patients will come to me and I can totally help. In my practice, we have a few pelvic floor physical therapists here to help, and we can bring that balance. But then if those microbes are kind of jabbing at you and you're reacting to that, well, then we can release this till the cows come home. We have to get it from the root cause. So there are wonderful things that you can do also after you have an infection, so that you're not staying in positions that actually potentially can create the problem from returning. So that's an interesting balance, right? Usually we see the muscles react to the internal environment. Now you fix the internal environment, but maybe you didn't fix the muscles. And now there's all sorts of like lack of flow in the body internally, because now the muscles are acting like they have to protect an area that they shouldn't really have to protect. So that's kind of how it becomes a little bit of a cyclical relationship, and we're here to kind of break the cycle. But the real overall goal is to actually get the pelvic floor to be automatically balanced as it should be. You don't have to Kegel till, you know, every single day. You shouldn't have to. It should just be naturally kicking in the right way at all times.
Totally. I mean, you touched on something that's so important, which is the fact that, as you are probably already able to see, all of these things are connected, right? We can't be thinking about your yeast infection completely separately from your pelvic floor and your recurrent UTIs. And I think one of the things that we're so excited about is starting to have these types of conversations so that people can realize that, you know, none of these problems exist in isolation, and understanding what they are and why they happen can help us really get to the root cause that might be affecting multiple symptoms.
Yep.
But I think, you know, we'd love to talk a little bit about, you know, just to give everyone a little bit of a sense of where we're going to go, talk about kind of the causes and symptoms of these different conditions, the available testing and diagnoses, and then talk a lot about kind of maintenance, prevention, and treatment. But to start with kind of the causes and the symptoms, I think I speak for everyone who's probably on this call that it can be so hard to understand what is causing your symptoms, right? There's so many different triggers that vary person to person. There's so few ways to test those things. And classically, you know, due to the gender health gap that, you know, affects all of our work every single day, we also don't have great language to describe symptoms in a way that gets to the specificity that we actually need to get to effective diagnoses that unlock more effective treatments. So I figured maybe we could spend a few minutes talking about the most common causes behind the issues that we're each focused on, and then also what symptoms people can look out for that might be a sign that they are having an issue in this specific area. And maybe we can go through vaginal health, UTIs, and then the pelvic floor. So Krystal, do you want to start causes and common symptoms?
I'd love to. So as you said, the causes or triggers, we think of it in the vaginal microbiome, vary from person to person. And I know that that is really frustrating, because what won't affect one person might be a chronic problem for someone else. And we, because of the gender health gap, don't really understand why you have this person to person variability. So the few things I'm going to mention aren't for everyone, but they're the things that we most commonly hear about and most commonly talk about in the literature. So the three I want to mention are sex, hormones, and the third thing is hygiene products. So first of all, starting with sex is a huge trigger for a lot of people. Sometimes it's multiple partners that cause a dysbiosis. Sometimes it's the same partner that causes symptoms again and again. Like I said, it's completely different for everyone. But the reason that happens is because we have bacteria all over our bodies, us and our partners. So anytime you're introducing a microbiome, a different microbiome, into the vagina, there's a chance for dysbiosis. And that's true for same-sex partners or opposite-sex partners. Their genitals also contain other microorganisms. So, and one thing you may not know is that semen actually has its own microbiome and can change the pH of the vaginal microbiome. So there's lots of ways in which sex can trigger a dysbiotic event. As for symptoms, they are so overlapping. I mentioned itchiness, discharge, pain. All of those can be internal or more external, like on their vulva. There's also lots of discomfort that you can have. And the main thing I want to mention is when we say discharge, we don't mean any and all discharge. Your vagina is a self-cleaning organ, and is going to get rid of anything that it can. And that discharge is normal. But when the discharge changes and you have an odd smell or a lot more of it, or it's a different color, that's when you need to start considering maybe I should go seek care for this. But your normal cycle discharge is totally fine. Moving on to the next one is hormones. So we know that hormones change throughout a menstrual cycle, and so do your vaginal microbiome. Your microbiome actually responds to hormones because your body is actually creating different food sources for the bacteria based on what hormones are present in your body. So you get a little bit of a flux throughout your menstrual cycle and the introduction of menstrual blood can change the pH and can change the microbiome as well. This is also why the vaginal microbiome tends to shift during pregnancy and following menopause, because the hormones are out of whack. So if any of that sounds like you, this is very common and can definitely help. The nice thing is, when it comes to particularly menopause, there are some treatment options that are very well studied and available there. And the last thing is shifts due to feminine hygiene products. And when I talk about that, I mean anything like a deodorant, a wipe, menstrual products, and douching. The first thing is, the research is very, very clear. Douching is never good under any circumstances. That disrupts your microbiome and actually creates, you're more likely to get vaginitis or bacterial vaginosis when you douche. So I would stay away from anything like that. But the rest of the feminine hygiene products, like that category, it really depends on the person. And some people are very sensitive to scented things. Some people are very sensitive to certain types of menstrual products. And it really is up to you trying to figure out what product is going to be the least disruptive to your microbiome. I think that answered your question, Priyanka, but
yes, absolutely. Okay. No, thank you so much for that comprehensive answer. And if people have more specific questions, you're welcome to put any of your questions throughout this. I forgot to say that at the beginning in the chat, and we will try to get to them at the end. Okay, but maybe Patricia, do you want to go next to talk a little bit about the causes and symptoms that are related to the pelvic floor?
Sure. There is, we treat as the N of one, right? Every single person has a different root cause, and that's part of the clinician to try to figure that out and tease that out for you. You're not supposed to try to figure that out on your own. But the big thing is to try to have this overall goal, as I said before, of trying to restore balance. So sometimes when we see, all right, someone had a ski accident, when they were younger, and they know, oh yeah, I was sore on my tailbone for a while. And that created almost a tension that then created an imbalance that then maybe even created this problem vaginally, right? But no one thinks of it like that. They just think, oh, I fell, that was an isolated event. Oh, my pelvic floor is a little bit weak, that's normal. But actually, there could have been a little tiny something that threw you off. Or it could be as simple as my computer screen is over here, and I like to write notes over there, and I'm living in a twist my whole life. So my pelvic floor is literally starting to get tight on one side, loose on another. I do a sport where I have to, jump a lot and rebound and do all of these things, and I'm losing control of, my bladder functioning and my continence. So we have to get to kind of just because you're having all of a sudden painful sex, or vulvodynia, or all of these types of different diagnoses that you might be given, which are very umbrella blanket terms for just, you have pain here, right? I think you had a great live yesterday that I participated in, and I think that was really on target. That's just giving you a sense of like, okay, this is the region of the area that I'm having issues in. But is it that the pelvic floor is just not working? I had a woman the other day, really, her breathing, when you breathe, your pelvic floor should rise as you exhale and descend as you inhale. It's just this relationship. She had the opposite happening. So nothing really was working, even her core. She came in really with her back pain, hip pain, and her belly not being able to like fire. And she felt like she couldn't do things in her normal workout. She was constantly straining her back. And we looked at everything, including the pelvic floor. She didn't even know it was imbalanced. And then she's like, oh, come to think of it, I have SIBO, I get yeast infections, I have this, and I think it's normal. So it's a very important thing to look at the musculoskeletal structure. What do you need to do? What does your posture look like? How are you putting your body in different positions? Do you have a baby? Did everything change because you were pregnant? And so it's such a vast thing, but you really have to look at this as, is my body able to support itself? Yes, the bladder control comes from the pelvic floor functions, but the pelvic floor gets its cue from your diaphragm. So if you've gone through a stressful event and you're closing down your breath and you're not breathing, well, guess what? The pelvic floor can't do its thing. I have a funny reel on my Instagram account where I make people just put their hand up like this, and everybody loves it, because what does it do? It at least gets your diaphragm to kind of open up. All of a sudden, the pelvic floor kind of comes up and you can make it to the bathroom.
Wow. Yeah.
So these are the little tricks of the trade, right? And so we have to just get to the root cause, restore that balance. Maybe you need release work. Maybe you need to just strengthen things, or maybe your diaphragm is kiboshing the whole thing because you're not breathing the right way. So there's all sorts of different ways that we have to go about getting your answer, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And next topic we're going to talk about is testing and treatment, which I think people have many questions about. So we'll come right back to that. Melissa, do you want to give a little bit of an overview of the causes and symptoms related to UTIs?
Yeah, sure. I think Patricia and Krystal covered a lot of what we also see in our community. So sex is a huge topic in our community. UTIs after sex is one of the most common issues, and hormones. So not just postmenopausal hormone changes, but also throughout the cycle. So a lot of people report having UTIs right before or after their period. And that means there's probably something going on with their hormones that is just changing the microbiome so that they're having symptoms at that time. But we also have people reporting things like dehydration as a trigger, or medication use, or some specific kind of sport like bike riding or horse riding. And a lot of people report swimming as a trigger. There's not enough research to really say why any of these things cause the symptoms to come on. From the sex perspective, traditionally it's been kind of thought that it's an ascending infection. So it could come from a partner's microbiome, or it could come from your own microbiome and then make its way into the urethra and then the bladder. But if you think about the chronic UTI kind of theory, that could be that the infection is actually embedded in the bladder already, and sex is really just a mechanical friction that's stirring it up. So we also don't know why some people have UTIs after sex and not others. We don't know if it's ascending. We don't know if it's already there. It means that we don't know then if the partner should also be treated. And there's just so many questions around this. And one of the reasons it's so complicated to overcome that, even though we do have lots of recommendations in our community to help. But UTI symptoms also have such a huge spectrum. We've just been running a conversation on Instagram where we've collected symptoms from our community, and we've been posting a different set of symptoms each week. One of the main areas of impact is mental health symptoms. So having this constant fear of UTIs, the pain that comes with it, the lack of understanding from other people, causes anxiety and depression, social anxiety, feelings of isolation. There's so many things that happen that are not thought of as physical symptoms, but also the physical symptoms can be unusual because of the nerve pathways in the body. You can have pain in your legs or in your toes or in your hands. You can have extremity pain that people don't necessarily link to the bladder, or lower back pain or diaphragm pain. People get brain fogginess, they get digestive symptoms. Who knows which one comes first? But the UTI symptoms are really just linked to so many other symptoms in the body. Once we started this conversation, it really opened a can of worms, and we've kind of found hundreds of different descriptions of the symptoms that come with UTI. And it's different for everybody. And I like what you said, Patricia, about how you have to approach everybody individually. And that is really how it is in our community. There's no one approach that will help people overcome this. And everybody has to kind of explore many different options in order to find a solution, if they can at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that leads perfectly well into the next topic. I'm going to combine the topics of testing and treatment just to make sure we have time to get to everyone and everything. But also, as everyone here knows and relates to everything you were all just saying, obviously getting to the root cause for you. And like you said, everyone is an N of one. That will help you actually identify the best possible treatment. So I do think that those things are highly related and we can talk to them that way. So maybe Krystal, do you want to start by talking about kind of the current access around the way we think about diagnostics and testing in vaginal health? And I know we can talk about this forever, but we will try to do this briefly. And then kind of what you think the gold standard is as it relates to testing, and how that then informs what personalized treatment looks like and why personalized treatment is so important for vaginal health.
Yes, great question. And before I jump into that, I also want to one thing Melissa said about the mental health symptoms, we see that a lot as well in the vaginal community. And I definitely want to acknowledge that, because the amount of isolation and social anxiety that happens with vaginal issues is really severe and can be quite debilitating. So moving on to diagnostics, like you said, there's a lot of different ways that this is done. And none of them are particularly good right now. It's my perspective that we aren't accurately diagnosing women, both for vaginal and urinary infections. Right now, we have these really broad umbrella terms a lot of people fit into: bacterial vaginosis or UTIs. And what I think we need to get to is a place where we can say, you have Gardnerella and Prevotella dominant with these specific genes that's causing these symptoms in your vagina. No longer just BV. I think we need to start stratifying these women a lot better so that they can get the accurate diagnosis and the accurate treatment. I think of it a lot like cancer diagnosis used to be, where you used to have cancer of the lung. There wasn't much people could do. And then we had the genome revolution, and we could actually sequence and say, oh, you have this specific mutation in this specific gene, and we know how to treat that. So we can help you. And then all the people that don't fall in that bucket, that's where we put the research focus on to develop new treatments and to help those people. And I think that's really where we want to get to. So we are kind of in the dark ages. Right now, most doctors diagnose based on observations that are very broad. It's kind of the 7,000-foot view. So you're going to take, doctors will often look at your symptoms. They might smell your discharge. That's called a whiff test. Literally, they're just smelling. That's part of the diagnosis. And they might look at your vaginal swab under a microscope. And this gives a very high level view of what the microbes in your vagina look like. And I like to think of it as you're in an airplane looking down on like fields and mountains and streams. And you can tell that those are fields and mountains and streams, but you can't tell what they're growing in that field or what tree is growing on that bank. And that is really helpful to understand if you're trying to understand the ecosystem as a whole, right? The other option is something called qPCR, which is much more targeted. So it can tell you whether or not there is a specific organism present. So in the airplane analogy, it'd be like saying lettuce is growing down there somewhere, but it wouldn't tell you which field. It wouldn't tell you what other things might be growing next to it, right? So it's a very specific telling you if the presence or absence of one thing. And what we're trying to do at Evvy is put both of those together. You get the overall perspective of here's the proportions of the different things that you have in your microbiome and their specific identities. So you can better understand the ecosystem as a whole. And I think that's what's going to allow us to then be able to identify on an individual level which specific infection each person actually has, and therefore come up with accurate treatments for each.
Love that. Yes. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at Evvy. We just launched our first access to our testing and care through Evvy, which we're so excited about, to finally give people, no matter where they live, access to vaginal health experts and specialists, because we know that's something that's just been not accessible to so many people for so long. And it's all based on the amazing work that Krystal has been doing here. So we're very grateful for that. Melissa, I think, as Krystal alluded to, there's a very similar problem in UTIs, right? Where we use rapid strips and standard cultures, which have many inaccuracies and problems, as we all know. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your opinions are around the best testing and the treatments that are the most effective today for UTIs?
Yeah, sure. So as Krystal mentioned, there is a problem with testing in the UTI space. Is quite a big problem, and it's possible that the testing itself has been contributing to this problem of recurrence and chronic UTI. The dipstick tests are up to 80% inaccurate. They're really geared towards picking up E. coli, as are standard urine culture. So if you get a urine test, you're basically going to get told if you have E. coli or not. And if in some cases there'll be a couple of other organisms that it might pick up, but now we know that urine is not sterile, and that is what this test was originally based on. There's hundreds of different organisms that can exist in the bladder, and most of them cannot be cultured. That means that we don't know what is in the bladder of most of these recurrent UTI sufferers. The other problem in addition to that is that just because it's there doesn't mean it's causing the symptoms. There's no test that can tell us that because you found E. coli, that is the thing that's causing the symptoms, or because you found Klebsiella, that is the problem. So treatment at the moment is based on whatever grew the fastest or the most in a test. There could be something else underneath that is actually causing the problem. You might always have E. coli in your body, as many people do, because it's just a commensal organism. So there's so many issues with testing that there is no new gold standard to replace culture. There's more comprehensive tests that can tell you a lot about what is in the microbiome, but when you think about that causation issue, those tests can't tell us what might be causing that problem. So it can give us more information, but it's really important for patients to work with a clinician who understands those tests, understands the theories about the microbiome, and then can kind of try to decide what to treat and what might be the best path forward, because it doesn't make sense to obliterate everything in the bladder And that is what is happening with a lot of treatments these days, broad spectrum antibiotics that just diminish the microbiome, and we don't know how to replenish it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Krystal said earlier, some of these bugs are good and they're helpful, right? So I think the idea that because there's a bug there, we should eliminate it is something that we're definitely going to evolve away from in the coming years. And Patricia, do you want to kind of wrap us up, and then hopefully we'll be able to take some of these amazing questions coming from the audience, and tell us a little bit about, I mean, obviously the pelvic floor is so often overlooked. Do you want to talk about what types of treatment that pelvic floor therapy can provide and how people can go about finding a great pelvic floor therapist?
So there is, in the American Physical Therapy Association, there's a women's health section. And these are the therapists that have done more coursework in women's health and pelvic floor. There's also continuing educational bodies and certifications that people can get women's health pelvic floor distinctions. And that would be one of the groups is Herman and Wallace, and they train a lot of people. We used to host their courses in New York City. And those are places I would probably start to try to find someone. But nowadays with telehealth, it's really amazing because once Medicare, which is the gold standard that most insurances just kind of look at what they do because it's government subsidized, they basically, you can find a pelvic floor therapist that's really great, or you've seen, some heard some things about or seen online. And you maybe connect with their bio and you can ask them for a telehealth appointment. So it's become, and I'm quite stunned. Lisa does a lot of our telehealth and she's like, I can't believe how these people are getting better. Even though I don't touch their pelvic floor, we basically, through a whole process and having them be involved in the kind of diagnostic process of what they're feeling, what they see, what they're feeling themselves in the tissues, they can come up with a plan that actually works. Now, sometimes you really do need an internal, release work, external release work, try to restore that balance. We happen to have extra tools like real-time ultrasound where we actually image the pelvic floor and see if the bladder is rising when the pelvic floor is actually functioning, if it's functioning on the right side as strong as the left. I mean, it's really kind of a little bit more detailed, but I would recommend that people look at those two sites, and then if you do find someone that you like, reach out to them and see if they will do a telehealth session. Don't just think, oh, they're not going to be able to see me, I'm not going to get any help. That help will surprise you and maybe better than nothing. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so helpful. Well, we have so many amazing questions from the audience. I'm just trying to read them now so we can hopefully get to a few of them. Someone asked, and this is related to two of you, so we'll start here. What are the thoughts on carrying out pelvic floor exercises while having a UTI? Are there any risks associated with that? Maybe the answer is a gender health gap, but I figured I'd ask.
Do you want to answer that, Melissa? Or?
I'll let you go first. I think we do get this question a lot in our community, though.
I would say that it is a slippery slope, and we have to see, because some patients get very irritated, just as Melissa said. If it's like one of these cases where sex is irritating and creating that, then you don't want someone kind of going in there and disrupting the whole situation. So we tend to be really take it on a case-by-case basis. But if you're one of those people that the irritant is actual penetration, then that wouldn't be a case for internal work. But that's not necessarily saying that you can't do pelvic floor exercises. You just have to be doing them correctly. So getting to know that you're actually firing the muscles in a balanced way appropriately is the answer. But if you don't know, I would back off until symptoms calm down, because you're probably going to be doing it in an asymmetrical, non-balanced fashion anyway.
I would just add to that a lot of people that have the continuous symptoms or very frequent episodes of UTI often find that just exercises that help them to relax the pelvic floor can sometimes help with the pain as well.
Yeah, like the breathing. Exactly. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Another question someone asked, and maybe this one, Krystal, is more related to your work, is Are there any relationships between IUDs and BV? I think something we haven't talked about so much yet is birth control. And obviously that plays a large role in so many of these different areas that we're discussing. And I think there has been a lot of talk in online communities about IUDs, people having certain experiences in and around getting IUDs as it relates to their vaginal infections. Can you share a little bit about where the literature and research stands on that topic today?
Yes. Some of this comes back to the type of contraceptions you're on. So obviously a hormonal contraception is going to have effects on your hormones, which we mentioned before, can affect your microbiome, sometimes in a very beneficial and positive way, but sometimes not. Kind of depends on you. The one thing that has been the most studied is copper IUDs, which are definitely associated with yeast infections specifically, and we think is associated with BV, although the research is still coming out there. But if you're on a copper IUD and you've had way more infections than before, it might be worth talking to your doctor about switching contraception modes.
Yeah, absolutely. One more question that's a little bit more vaginal microbiome specific. Someone said that they had read about lactoferrin for recurrent BV and was wondering if you could speak to what the role is of lactoferrin in the vaginal microbiome.
Lactoferrin is a molecule that helps get iron out of the system. So all microbes, all of life need iron in order to survive. We use it to, allow oxygen to be pumped around our body. The microbes need it just as much. And so for a lot of infections, including in the bladder, there's lots of research about this in the bladder, your body actually tries to go out and sequester iron and bring that iron back in so that pathogens don't need to have it as much. Interestingly, lactobacilli are one of the only organisms that don't have a huge requirement for iron, so they can survive in very low iron environments. So if you can remove the iron from the place of infection, that takes away some of the ability for pathogens to live, but doesn't inhibit the lactobacilli at all. So it can be a very effective tool in that way.
Amazing. So many great questions here. Someone asked, if you are limited by your insurance or a tight income, what are things that kind of anyone can do? Maybe you can't afford to see a pelvic floor therapist or get care from Evvy. Are there any things, and maybe this can be our question to wrap up, what are things you'd recommend that everyone does for general kind of prevention and maintenance as it relates to their vaginal, urinary, and pelvic health? Melissa, do you want to start?
Yeah, I would say it's a difficult one to say that there's anything that could work for everybody. So there's plenty of things that people use for prevention, but one way to learn about those things is to join one of the UTI support groups. And there are a lot of those groups on Facebook, and patients are very willing to share their experiences. We also have resources on our site, and we're happy to answer any questions if people reach out to us. But because of the lack of research, there isn't anything that we could say is the front runner in prevention of UTIs.
What about Patricia? Do you want to go next on the pelvic floor? Is there anything, especially for people who can't afford a pelvic floor physical therapist? Obviously, one of the many wars that we're fighting is that they should be covered by insurance for everyone, everywhere. But if that's not the case, do you have any recommendations for people?
I do recommend that you start really addressing and connecting with your body and your posturing, and trying to be very true to more neutral mechanics in your body, and doing some regular practice of breathing. And it doesn't have to be deep breathing. I'd like to show, I'm a certified behavioral breathing analyst, that's why I harp on this, but this is what really changed a lot of my success rate with patients that had these stubborn problems, and also Evvy helped too. But basically, having the ability to start expanding your diaphragm, start going into inversions, that helps to take pressure off of the system, kind of give some space in there. Generally, space is a good thing. So I don't like doing one size fits all either. Just like Melissa just said, there's different recipes for success for everyone. But I would say, like, doing some down dog, getting onto all fours, taking some pressure off of the actual pelvic floor that you're sitting on all day, and then trying to expand by doing like a 360 breath where you're thinking about breathing into the sides and back of your lower ribs. The widening on the lateral costal breathing has been shown to be the most connected to the diaphragm. And when you connect to your diaphragm, you get more normalcy and tone in your pelvic floor. So just don't bother with the pelvic floor. Don't get so crazy about being right on it. think more about the diaphragm and then watch some of the stuff start to get better. You can go on my Instagram page. I harp on these things all the time.
I was going to say, you just have to follow Patricia Ladis and check out some of her amazing videos, some of which include TikTok dances for your pelvic health. So I strongly recommend.
That also highlight Amelia from Evvy.
But maybe we can wrap up with you, Krystal, if you want to just share a little bit about preventative steps that people can take for their vaginal health.
To go back to the triggers very quickly, use condoms for sex. That will help. The hormones, just pay attention to your cycles, be aware and understand where your symptoms might be coming from, and that will really help with discussions with your physician. And be aware of anything that you're really putting down there and if it might be altering your microbiome. And last I would say is the microbiome is all connected, kind of like Patricia Ladis is saying. It's not just one place. There's lots of things happening in your body. And honestly, if you have a good gut microbiome, that will probably decrease the number of UTIs, decrease the rates of BV. And the trick with that is eating a diverse plant-based diet, right? Give those bacteria the food that they want to eat, and the good ones are going to grow. Also, just stay hydrated. So I like to say that the answer to some of these microbiome issues is not sexy. It's eat healthy foods and drink water and get plenty of rest. That's what doctors have been saying for millennia, right? But it really does help for your overall microbiome health.
Amazing. And I will give our final plug, which is obviously that, taking a test with Evvy can really help you understand what might be going on, understand what your baseline is, what do you look like when you're healthy, what does it look like when you have symptoms, how is it changing with your menstrual cycle? We always say that people deserve so much more data on their own bodies. I mean, we are the experts on our own bodies. So how can you have the data to advocate for yourself, whether that's with a doctor or a partner? And I think that all three of our amazing panelists here are providing so much amazing information along those lines. I think Amelia has put in the chat all of the ways that you can follow them to learn more and better advocate for yourself. But I think Live UTI Free is at Live UTI Free. Patricia Ladis is at Patricia Ladis. Krystal is at Krystal Microbiome, and obviously at Evvy. But we hope that this was informative and, gave people the information that they were looking for as it relates to these three very common and can be very frustrating topics. But most importantly, we are so, so grateful for all three of your time and also the amazing work that you are doing every day for women and people with vaginas everywhere. So thank you everyone so much for joining. Hopefully this is the first of many. Feel free to send us any other questions and we will try to help however we can. Thanks so much.
This is great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.